Yechuri.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, I think there's a very important amendment to the Constitution that we are considering, and it requires a certain degree of serious attention consideration. I would like to make 5 major points, sir, with your permission. The first of this concerns the federal structure of our Constitution. I remember, sir, it was very wonderful and nice to hear my old friend, colleague, somebody with whom I have interacted for more than 2 decades, and somebody with whom I had many a contentious argument, and particularly on this issue as well. And it was wonderful to hear him again, once again. So welcome back, and thank you very much for what you've said. But I would also like to add, as a compliment, and not to be taken as an offense, that he sounds much better from the other side of the aisle than he did from this side of the aisle. So thank you very much for that. And this is a point on which I had...
Better or realistic?
I'm sorry, sir?
Better or realistic?
both. Better, therefore realistic. Sir, this is an issue on which we have a very serious point. Remember, sir, the Constitution of India, Article 1, says India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. Without the states, there is no India. And the federal structure of our Constitution springs from that concept. And therefore, the entire structure, the federal structure and the rights of the states is something that is absolutely fundamental to the Indian Constitution. And it's that Constitution because of which all of us are here and discussing. And therefore, this structure, this issue of a general goods tax, services was not included at that point of time when the Constitution was being debated. What was being talked about was taxes on goods. This was not a new concept that has come up now. It has been going on in our country, at least in our Constitutional Assembly debates since then. Whether the state should have the right to have a sales tax. And let me quote Dr. Ambedkar, sir, on this issue in the Constituent Assembly debates. What does he say? I quote, "It seems to me that if we permit the sales tax to be levied by the provinces, then the provinces must be free to adjust the rate of the sales tax to the changing situation of the province, and therefore a ceiling from the center would be a great handicap in the working of the sales tax." He continues, sir, again quote, I quote, "There are a large number of resources on which the provinces depend have been concentrated in the center list. It is desirable at least to leave one important source of revenue with the provinces. Therefore, I think that the proposal to leave the sales tax in the hands of the provinces from that point of view is very justifiable thing," unquote. This issue has been under debate since then. We introduced the VAT in our wisdom. Much of that has been encroached upon. Now the GST, bringing the services also into its ambit along with the goods, will virtually take away this right. Now the state governments, or what was called the provinces then, not having any right to raise resources for whatever they would consider they are elected. They consider as important for the welfare of the people in those states, that will now be prohibited. How are you going to address this issue? I've discussed it with the finance minister myself, and we said at the time when the GST bill comes, then this should be addressed in the sense leaving some flexibility to the states. I'll tell you why, sir. Today you have the Kerala government, from where you come, sir, the state, has imposed a tax called the health tax. It is on your fast food and all these sorts of foods that increases obesity. It is a very noble thought. It's been welcomed internationally. But such rights will not exist after we enact this amendment and the bill subsequently. Or take the case of West Bengal, the state I come from, to this house. A tax has been imposed, a surcharge on cigarettes to raise revenues to pay for the victims of the Sharda scam. People are being asked to pay for the victims of the Sharda scam. Fine, whatever be that issue, that's a separate issue. But such rights do not exist in case of national calamities. Are we to reduce the state governments, elected state governments by the people of these states to come to the center with a begging bowl saying that declare so-and-so issue as a national disaster and give us certain amount of money? What will be the legitimate rights of the states? And we are the Council of States in this August House. How do we protect that right? And that is an important point that needs to be considered, and therefore, I would request the Finance Minister, when he replies today, and more than that, when the GST bill actually comes, to ensure that there is a flexibility of this nature, whereby the states do not end up being actually coming with a begging bowl to the center, and the concept of federalism of the states and the center is destroyed from our constitution. That is something we cannot accept. So I demand that an assurance come on this count, and also a provision come when we actually discuss the GST bill. When it comes. Yeah, if and when it comes. The second major point I want to take, sir, is a point with which I was so happy, as I said earlier, hearing it from my good friend, Sir P. Chidambaram, the question of the entire concept of a goods and services tax, which is actually an indirect tax, and an indirect tax is a regressive tax. And the regressive tax has been explained, and all of us who know what is a regressive tax and how it burdens the poor much more, and it should not burden those people for whose welfare we are all supposed to work for. Now, how is this, you consider the situation. In India today, the direct tax component revenue in our country today for our country's resources is 37.7%. 62.3% already comes from your indirect taxes. That is, the people are burdened by that amount. In the last budget, the Honorable Finance Minister presented, indirect taxes have been hiked to the tune of 20,000 crores around, while the direct taxes have been reduced by over 1,000 crores. What are you doing, sir? Enriching the rich, impoverishing the poor? Now, in this sort of an atmosphere, but compare our 37.7% of direct tax collections with the other emerging economies in South Asia. Look at Indonesia. They have a direct tax component of the revenue of 55.8%. Look at South Africa. They have a direct tax revenue, part of your BRICS. They have a direct tax revenue component of 57.5%. We have 37.7%. And on top of that, if the GST, if you do not have a cap on its limit, a limit on the GST, it will be an increasingly regressive tax that will impose greater and greater burdens on the people. Now, you have worked out, Mr. Arvind, I won't name him, but the Chief Economic Advisor's report, all of us, those of us who have read it, and all of us think that they are very, very reasonable economic arguments that have been economically sound arguments that have been put there. And the revenue neutral rate, the R&R, as it's called, the R&R was estimated, and that has already been explained in the House at 15% or 15.5%, whatever that, that exact figure is. But remember, sir, there was an R&R calculated in 2014, which we had then very strongly opposed. And that R&R that was calculated then was 27%. 27%, 12.77% as the central taxes, and 13.91% as the state taxes. Now, if you have this sort of an R&R, and on top of that you have the bands, you may have bands less than that. But then a tax rate of around 24%, 25%, that will just cripple the vast majority of our people. And I've said this before, sir, what is the reality today? In the last 1 year, the number of US dollar billionaires in our country, it is reported, have increased from 100 to 150. Wonderful. May the tribe increase. So, as the old saying goes, that is the shining India. What does the 2011 census economic data report show us? 90% of Indian families, 90%, the bread earner of the family earns less than 10,000 rupees a month. Your census figures. These are the two Indias you already have. And on top of that, if you get a regressive tax regime, you are only widening the hiatus between the two Indias. And that is not the spirit with which our constitution enjoins us to come to this house to legislate. And therefore, I think it's absolutely necessary that instead of a revenue neutral rate, you start considering what I would call a fair revenue rate. I'm seriously suggesting to the Honorable Finance Minister that this be considered as a fair revenue rate and work on it. By the time you bring the GST bill, you can actually work on a fair revenue rate for the states concerned, and then you have a cap on it, and that assurance must also come when the GST bill is brought before us. How it will be brought, I'll come to later, when it's brought before us, and that should be taken into account. The third major point that I have, sir, is concerning the concrete amendments. The concrete amendments that the Honorable Finance Minister moved, there are certain problems in this. The third amendment, for instance, at clause 9, where he suggests three categories he is given, 1A, 1B, and 1C. Correct, the amount apportioned to a state 1A, to a state under clause 1 shall not form part of the consolidated fund of India. Yes, because it has to be shared. So once it goes in there, then you and I will have to sit again to apportion it, correct? Second is also by the same logic, okay? The third, where an amount collected as tax levied by a state under a state, etc., such amount shall not form part of the consolidated fund of the state. Now, why should that be there? A tax collected by the state for the state GST, it naturally has to go into the consolidated fund of the state. And there is actually a conceptual problem. Where do revenues collected go? What is the mechanism whereby the distribution is done immediately so that the revenue can be collected and somebody sits on it? That is an important aspect that needs to be clarified. So that is what I would want the Finance Minister to reconsider 1C of Amendment number 3 that is moved. Sorry? You see, and secondly, the point, that's an important point. You collect revenue. What is the mechanism and what is the time frame within which that is shared between the states and the center? If you don't have that clarity, then how can you collect revenue which doesn't go into the consolidated fund? That's not permissible under our constitution. That cannot remain in vacuum, hanging somewhere, that amount. So therefore, this is a serious lacuna, according to me, that needs to be addressed. There is another amendment, the fourth, that has been moved by the Honorable Finance Minister. Sir, I have with me letters from the chair of the Empowered Committee of State Finance Ministers, a position that since this bill has discussed over the last 2 decades, a position that was occupied by the left-front government's finance minister, now occupied by the current finance minister of West Bengal, and a letter also from the finance minister of Kerala. I know letters by the state finance minister should not be normal course be read out here, so I'm not reading out the letters.
You cannot authenticate.
I'm sorry?
You cannot authenticate.
Why can't I? Can. I said I will.
You can say that.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman, if you so say so. But you're saying from there, not from the chair, so that's no problem. Now both the West Bengal Finance Minister and the Kerala Finance Minister. And their point, I think there is a point in which they argue that there has been an issue on the question of a tax levied and collected by the Union under Clause 2 of etc., etc. This is the newly proposed Amendment 1B under Article number 4 of the Finance Minister's amendments to Clause 10. And whereby this amendment, I am informed, has not been discussed in the last Empowered Committee meeting of the Finance Ministers. And it goes against the decision of the Empowered Committee of 2014, where it was decided that the residual amount in the IGST shall be shared with the states as per the Finance Commission formula. So therefore, both the states have suggested, Chairman of the Empowered Committee have suggested that this be deleted and let the clause 10 remain what it was as the Lok Sabha passed it. That it needs serious consideration, and I would like the Finance Minister to respond to that when he sums up this discussion. The fourth major point is, of course, on the dispute resolution mechanism. Right now, it appears it's been left to the GST. They'll work out a mechanism. But I think greater thought must be given to that, and that mechanism must be spelled out more concretely and in a tangible form at the time when the GST bill is brought for consideration. And that I'm requesting the Finance Minister to do so. Finally, sir, I know you're looking at the clock, sir. So finally, I'll end with only one point, that, sir, this is a very, very serious piece of legislation. We are making a very major radical departure from the revenues collected by the state and the central governments for their functioning. We are making a very major departure from the objectives for which these revenues are collected and how they will be spent. Now, this GST bill, therefore, is a bill of such a major importance that it should come back for consideration, not merely the GST bill, but all the bills connected with the GST. There is the IGST, there is the SGST, interstate and the state. They must all be brought here also for our deliberations, and therefore they should not be brought as a money bill. I've made this appeal to the Finance Minister myself. Please bring them as a finance bill, because I've given, sir, you are aware, I've told you earlier my interpretation of Article 110 of the Constitution of India. A non-legal, non-lawyer, common sense interpretation. 110(1) says what are the items that constitute a money bill.
Yes.
110(2) says what are the items that do not constitute a money bill. 110(3) states that in the case of a dispute, the decision of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha will be final. Common sense interpretation is that the matter under adjudication of the Honorable Speaker of the Lok Sabha are matters that are not mentioned in either 110(1) or 110(2). Only then 110(3) should come into operation. But now what is happening? 110(3) is coming into operation for matters listed in 110(1) and 2. Common sense interpretation, I think that is wrong. But anyway, one of our colleagues has taken it to the Supreme Court, so I mean, let's wait for the verdict. So in that spirit, my request is, and I've said this once before, before ending I'll say it, sir. I've said this once before, in our own, let's say, indiscretion or hangover or this thing from the colonial rule, we have inherited many practices from the Westminster. Some of them we are trying to correct now, we have corrected at least one. We no longer present the budget at 5 p.m. Thankfully, if you present it at 11 o'clock, because they would be waking up there in London at that time at 5 p.m. Now, one of the things that remains, which we have inherited, is the color codes. The Westminster has a 3-color code. It has green, red, and the royal blue for the Queen of the Majesty to come in. Mercifully, we have eliminated that royal blue by declaring ourselves a republic very correctly, and I'm very happy for that. But we continue with the green and the red color combination, color code. The Lok Sabha is green, the Rajya Sabha is red. In the indiscretion, if the Lok Sabha passes any legislation, which in our wisdom and consideration we think is not in the interests of the people, we will show the red flag and stop it for the interests of the people in the country.
That is what we are for.
That right cannot be denied.
Yeah.
Constitution begins by the Constitution begins. The Constitution, sir, the supremacy of sovereignty in our Constitution is the people. We begin the Constitution by saying, we the people give ourselves and enact this Constitution. The interests of the people are supreme. In the GST, final consideration when we give it, interests of the people, are they going to improve? Are they going to deteriorate?
They are going to important move.
And there, sir, I only want to remember, earlier it has been quoted that the experiences of other countries where the GST, last point, experience of other countries where the GST was passed. I want to, one country that's been left out by my colleague was that of Canada. And remember, sir, Mr. Mulroney of the Conservative Progressives in 1991 had a two-third majority, brought the GST bill, big uproar in the country. They had to invoke the colonial provision as saying the order of the Majesty, the Queen of England. And then it was passed. In 1993, 2 years later, the elections took place in Canada. From a two-third majority, they came down to 2 representatives.
Yeah.
So that example is also there. So you please, keep all that. So finally, interest of the people, sir, that should be the prerogative, priority. And I hope on that basis, we will take up the other bills that will come. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sri